Servus, Matthias here, and this is Singletrack. Let's start with a bit of housekeeping. Last week was one of our biggest shows to date. Thank you. You will love FKTs and our rundown of what Alex Bond and I felt were the biggest and coolest FKT efforts in Washington State. If you haven't, give it a listen. Some really inspiring routes and efforts there. And to everyone else, thank you for listening and for the support. Also, in response to last week's show, Jeremy Anderson messaged me sharing his version of a traverse on the Olympics we mentioned on the show. Starting from Skokomish, Staircase area, and then running via Gladys, Flapjack Lakes area, through or around the Sawtooth Range, bushwhacking, all the way over to the Lake of the Angels and down to Hammer Hammer. And lots of backcountry travel there, lots of opportunity to summit some really cool peaks like the Sawtooth, Mount Stone, Mount Skokomish, that area there. If you're interested in more info, please reach out to me directly at matthias@singletrack.fm. Well, speaking of Singletrack, my holiday gift guide is up at singletrack.fm/gear. There, I share my favorite outdoor gear of 2021, like, for example, my favorite shoes, guess what brand, and my hydration vest and other really cool gear I got this year. I also share some gift ideas for runners and others, so go to singletrack.fm/gear to get the info on all of the coolest gear for 2021. One of the items that made it onto my gift guide is the Sea to Summit Alto TR1 tent. This is a one-person ultralight tent that truly is amazing. And if you know me, you know that I am not much of a backcountry camper. But this tent is so small, so light, packs down tightly, and is made from ultra-cool, durable material that even I start dreaming of camping in the backcountry. Sea to Summit sent me the tent to review, and I'm blown away what these hyperlight tents are capable of. Yeah, $400 is not cheap, but if you're looking for a gift that inspires to adventure, this is the one. Wow. For full review, check the gift guide at singletrack.fm/gear and the link in the show notes. The second product I want to share with you is the Lakeside jacket from Jack Wolfskin, available in women's and men's style for about $200. You remember me talking about Jack Wolfskin. We had Roberto Gutierrez, director of brand marketing Jack Wolfskin North America, on an episode of Singletrack a few months ago. We talked about where the brand comes from and how it positions itself in the US market. This jacket is sort of the perfect example for this. It's a water-resistant, 100% windproof soft shell. The jacket offers chemical-free protection from UVA and UVB rays. Material is breathable, water-repellent, abrasion resistance. I can go on, but it's crazy that a $200 jacket can offer all of this. That's the Jack Wolfskin brand in a nutshell for you. The European styling might take some getting used to. Folks who mainly walk around in hoodies, but the quality for the price is sort of mind-blowing. So that's the Lakeside jacket from Jack Wolfskin. Check out the links in the show notes again, and of course the gift guide at singletrack.fm/gear. All right, now to this week's show. Finally, right? My guest this week is Emily Holland, a writer, podcast producer, and host from Boulder, Colorado, and also a trail runner. I met Emily a few weeks ago. We're an outdoor podcaster group on Facebook, and I invited her to come on the show and share her personal and professional story with us. This episode is all about finding peace and inspiration while running trails wherever they may be, and also a bit of a meta conversation around podcasting and other nerdy stuff. So let's dive in.
Yeah, I'm calling in from Boulder, Colorado. I live here with my partner and our small dog, Kada, and we moved here 2.5 almost years ago from the Boston area. So we lived there for about 5 years, and we're both from the northeast of the United States.
Amazing. So, Emily, you are you showed up on my radar both because you are a podcast producer and host, but you're also a trail runner, and so I think we should quickly circle around that corner because I love my podcast is really not trying to chase the professional trail runners who are just setting FKTs and, winning races. Trail running is in its most beautiful form a super accessible sport and an activity, and it's so much more than just the racing and the professional side of it. So tell me a little bit about your trail running as amateurish, as layperson, as relaxed it can be. How do you trail run? I love it.
Yeah, I actually, until a couple years ago, I absolutely hated trail running. And I'll explain why. Probably because I had road raced for a long time, and not like competitively or anything, but that was like my thing. I was always signing up for races to motivate myself to run, to motivate myself to train, to get myself going out the door, really. And my partner kind of introduced me to trail running in that we were doing a lot of hiking in New Hampshire, and we just started like running down because we just wanted to be done with the hike faster.
Totally.
Yeah. And then at that point, I was just at this weird mental space where I wasn't yet like really comfortable with who I was. And I just felt still like I needed to fit this like outdoor mold that I just couldn't force myself into. And I wasn't yet okay with just like creating my own way of engaging with the outdoors, whether that be through trail running or climbing. And so I just hated it because I was like so out of control. I didn't trust my feet. I like fell all the time. It was terrible. So when I moved to Colorado, I had started to get into it a little bit more in the Northeast and start to really understand the value of it. I moved to a new place, and I lived across from this like beautiful reservation of land that is in the Northeast area in Boston that we live, the Middlesex Fells, if anyone is familiar with that. And there was great trail running in there, a lot of it being really rocky. So I would just allowed myself the ability to just get better at trail running, because a lot of it is just like getting more comfortable with that like unevenness of the trail, right? I mean, going from road running to doing that, it's like you just got to get more comfortable with it. You're not going to be great at trail running the first time you do it, especially if you're on like rocky terrain or whatever. So yeah, I hated it. And then I started to really understand why people liked it so much. And not only that, but I was able to do the two things I love the most, which were running and going to the outdoors and being in the woods and see mountains and like come across lakes and rivers and all of that beauty that was around us, both in the Northeast and now here in Colorado. And so that's kind of how I kind of got more into trail running, for sure.
Do you feel like, I hear that from a lot of people who hate trail running early on. Now, a lot of people come from a road running, often high school and collegiate running even, and they're putting too much pressure on speed and pace and competitiveness. Do you feel like that was something that was weighing on you, or was it just the feeling of sort of being out of control in an uneven terrain?
You're so right. It was both, right? Because you're used to a certain mileage pace, right, from the road that you're just very rarely going to achieve on a trail, just because it's harder, right? It's harder. You have to navigate mentally where you're putting your feet, and that takes more effort. So I do think it was a transition period. And I think the other thing that I love what you said about not really thinking about like FKTs and like being the best runners out there in the races, because I really that doesn't inspire me to think about stuff like that. When I think about like things that I had to do to get okay with my own trail running journey and like how I was going to have a relationship with it, I had to like completely delete Strava, because I was just looking at other people's times and like what they were able to do. And it just made me feel like crap. It made me feel bad about my own running abilities. And I know nothing about their physiology. They know nothing about mine, but just the paces and the mileage and all of that. I was like, this is too comparative for me. And it definitely got in my head for quite a while. And only in the last, I would say 2 years have I come to understand that trail running, just like every other outdoor sport that you do, there's different levels to it and you can always improve certain things, but can also just be like your meditative time in the woods. It doesn't need to be this big, incredibly hard and like epic thing all the time. It can just be that you're going out for a run with your dog or with your friends. And that's what I've really come to lately, is really using it as a tool to connect with other people and to connect with nature in the truest sense.
The other thing that I tell myself a lot, both in comparison pace from the road to the trail and then also comparing to others, is that GPS watches are notoriously inconsistent. So I always tell myself that if my pace is slower, then it must be my watch, right? So I mean,
yeah.
I blame technology. No, I'm kidding.
Yes.
You are speaking absolutely to the right thing, that it's about this personal inspiration, and it sort of gives you this little moment of adventure where our life is so controlled and organized, and we need control and organization in order to even know what we're doing every single day. And then running gives you this small moment of playfulness and adventure, and I think we as humans crave that. And so I think if we can focus on that, then we get to the heart of what makes trail running great for us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also like what I came to recently that is definitely a product of a lot of hard work internally that I had to do for myself is that I'm just trying to approach this and other sports that I do in the outdoors with a really like curious, almost beginner's mindset. It doesn't matter how many years I've been running or climbing. I know this is primarily about running, but for other outdoor sports that I do too, I just want to come to them thinking, I, rolled my ankle again. Is there a way that I can like get better at that? That's interesting. Maybe I can think about, my downhill form and making it easier for myself or faster for myself if that's something I want to tackle. Like really coming to these different parts of the sport that you might want to get better at with like, that's interesting. I wonder how I could do that instead of you suck. Get better. Like, why aren't you as fast as like Killian? You know what I mean? I just want to come to and it makes it so much more fun to come to those moments with, interesting, instead of you suck.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me a little bit about the trails around Boulder. It is now October 20th. Are you already looking at snowy trails? What does your sort of weekly running routine look like? What trails do you find out your front door?
Yeah, so fortunately in Boulder, there's tons and tons of trails. Like I say all the time, I could live here for 25 years and I don't think I could even tap into like 10% of the trails that we have within 30 minutes of us. So it is incredible here. And I think for the most part, there's some pretty good single track. There's some pretty good, a little bit technical, but not so technical that you're like, just climbing up huge rock steps and it's basically like a mountain biking course. So there's a lot of variation of terrain that is really cool. So you can get a really easy run in where you could just go and have like a very flowy run up in the hills, like 25 minutes from my door. That is wonderful. I go to Batasso Preserve in Boulder all the time. It's a perfect like 7-mile figure eight. That's really awesome. There are mountain bikes on it, but there's a couple days where mountain bikes are not allowed. So I try to prioritize those so that I'm not like stopping every 2 seconds to let them go by. And then there's some really good actual mountains really close in Boulder to our house, like a 10-minute drive to the trailhead. And so you can get elevation gain of, if depending on what you do in this area, you could get gain of 1K in the morning over like just one of the mountains, or you could do this entire Boulder Skyline Traverse, which is, I think, about 19 miles, and it gives about 5,600 gain in feet, that is. And so there's just like all this variation. So generally my running lately, as I was saying, looks like community based. Like it's my way of meeting up with friends and like catching up with them throughout the week. So I'll text like a couple different people and I'll try to set up morning runs with a couple different folks so that first I have accountability to actually get up and run in the morning. And then second, that I have a time that I can connect with that person and we're doing an activity that we both love together. So I think my top 3 favorite trails in Boulder are Lion's Lair, which is like a perfect 5.5 mile loop that is off of Mount Sanitas, which is a small little mountain in Boulder. And then Batasso, as I said, and then there's a great loop called Walker Ranch that is certainly a little bit more challenging. There's a lot of uphill and downhill, some really flowy parts, but it's just a gorgeous valley with a beautiful river running through it that you kind of wind through. So really gorgeous stuff in Boulder.
I love this. I think this is something that trail running has sort of unlocked in our culture, where you have mountaineering, you have got climbing, where the sort of the objective is hard and there's a level of risk and danger involved, and you can't do it everywhere. There's certain areas where you don't have mountains, and there a certain area where you might have to drive too far or you get snowed out over the winter time. But trail running is on hiking trails, can be in city parks, it can be so accessible to people and can be not just for any ability but also for any time of the day. You don't have to have perfect weather. You don't have to even have the right kind of skill or physical condition at the moment, right? You can find a trail that works for you, and at the same time you can still find a way of pushing yourself. So I love that. The broadness of the sport, right?
Yeah, I think what lights me up around trail running these days is something like Batasso, where, like a year or 2 years ago, there are certain uphill sections of that I couldn't run. And so to keep going back to similar places, you can kind of get these minute progressions that you don't really get in every other aspect of your life, or maybe you're not paying attention to as much in the other aspects of your life. Where, I go do this 8-mile or 7-mile loop there now, and I'm like, I can run the entire thing. It's not fast, but I can actually physically run it instead of having to hike up these portions. And not to say that the hiking part, it means you're not a runner, of course. Like, people hike all the time as trail runners, and I do it all the time. But in that particular trail, I just get excited where I'm like, I was able to finish it in this perfect circuitous motion, and it feels very flowy and engaging. So I think there's these little progressions and little wins that you don't necessarily need to race to get as well as you're exploring the trails around your house or whatever's accessible to you.
No, I think you're speaking to something really incredible, because not just this repetitiveness of experiencing the same trails and seeing how your body and mind sort of responds differently and improves over time makes you a better trail runner. It makes you a better human being, because you're learning through these small improvements due to repetitiveness. You're actually learning that this is sort of the key to a lot of hard things in life. Yeah. Right? Because we always want that sort of quick way of unlocking something. And most of the time in life, you can't unlock something quickly. You need time. Totally. And you sort of need that slow grinding, sometimes even passive, right? You don't even have to super focused actively work on. You just regularly go out and all of a sudden, da-dum, it works, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why also in the beginning I hated trail running so much, because, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I think a lot of people feel this way. For some reason, we feel like we should be good at things immediately. I don't know why we feel that way. I'm like, I've never trail run before and I'm having a hard time doing it. So I must be bad. I must be a bad athlete. No, you've just never done it before. So you're not going to be good at it the first, 10, 20, 100 times you do it. You might not be great at it the first 1,000 times you do it, but you just keep going back and learning a little bit more and more, getting more comfortable with it more and more. And you're right, it's such a good life lesson overall. Consistency is like the key to every single thing that we do.
Yeah. I mean, in some respects, I believe part of the reason is that we get frustrated with ourselves is because we are impatient, right? We want to get there quickly, but I think one of the reasons of why we are impatient is because we feel like there is so many things out there to experience and explore. And we've talked about this in last week's episode where we talked about these fastest known time routes, and even if they don't inspire us perhaps to try to be the fastest, especially in Boulder, you probably have some very stiff competition on trails.
No way I'm ever gonna do that.
But what's the beauty of the FKT is creating your own routes, right? And you get inspired
yes.
of what could possibly be done, right? I think that that it used to, similarly as I previously said, right, the only objective was get up to the mountain and get back down, and now we can combine peaks, so we can create this longer route that combines different features and stuff. And I think there is something fun there, but that can also be super frustrating because we see all these places that we want to explore and we feel like, well, we only have that much time in our life. We need to get there quickly.
Yeah, no, I feel that too. And sometimes too, like I'll be trail running in a really beautiful place, and like this picture that I see of you that I'm sure you have up everywhere is so great. And you're like in these huge mountains, and I find that sometimes when I'm on bigger loops, I will hike more because I'm like, I want to take this in. I don't want to just like be looking down at my feet the entire time. I want to be able to like actually take in the view and be here now. And I think the other thing with the immediate gratification piece is like, we see people on social media who are hitting these goals of like winning races or getting the FKT. And we don't really see a lot of like all of the base foundation they had to build in order to like get to that even point of thinking about doing an FKT or thinking about trying to win a race. We only see their like victories and this awesome content of them looking amazing running. And we don't see all the crap and the days they probably like had a terrible run and they cried or like they just broke down after or whatever. So we're doing this comparative thing where it's like we're comparing the ugliest, maybe worst parts of us to like the best reel of everyone else's running experience.
No way. Don't tell me that Instagram is bad for us in that
Listen,
regard.
You heard it here first on the Singletrack podcast.
Oh man, it is so true, right? In some respects, obviously posting our best pictures is meant to inspire us, right? I mean, we do it ourselves too. When we think about posting, we think about what are the highlights of our day, of our life, of this vacation. When we don't post these other aspects, but it does create a very sort of skewed experience. And I mean, I'm sort of in a weird place because I'm hosting a trail running podcast and I love trail running and I had an epic summer, but I'm sort of in this like post-summer, post-big race feeling where I've not really had the need of putting running shoes on. Like I don't have an objective to chase, and both physically and mentally, I'm sort of allowing myself to take an off season right now, but it does feel like, well, how long do I want to do this? Do I want to do this 2 weeks or 2 months? Like at some point you got to go back out there, right?
Yeah, I hear you. I think I heard something. I mean, the idea of, I'm not a religious person, but I heard this on a podcast, like the idea of Lent and giving up something for, I believe it's 40 days. Sometimes I will leave either running or climbing or whatever sport I'm doing at the time behind for a good chunk of time. And then when I come back to it, I'm so stoked. It's almost like annoying to the people around me that I'm just like so excited to get back to it. And I think it's just necessary. Otherwise you get, like you said, you're kind of like feeling that burnout that you can get both physically and like mentally with the motivation piece.
No, for sure. I find myself really embracing being a seasonal human being, if you will, that the summer is all about the mountains, but I'm not just a mountain guy. I enjoy that the winter is, for me, all about being at home. I enjoy reading books. I enjoy baking. And so for me, when the weather first turns and gets cold out and I can justify having the oven on all day long so I can bake my bread, I get really excited about that. I'm like, oh yeah, I sort of have missed that over the summer. And rather than getting sad, I'm like, oh, the mountains are now inaccessible for us as runners. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, actually, I've got something else I can do now for a few months while I'm dreaming of my adventures for the coming summer.
I love it. Yeah, I want some of that bread. If you could send me some, that would be great.
All right, I'll make sure. I don't know if that works from a freshness point of view, but I'll see what I can do about that.
All right, I'll come by next time.
I like it. We'll go on a run and then I'll have some bread afterwards.
Oh, sounds great.
So speaking of running and bread, most epic experience. We've talked about your sort of your daily runs, your daily routes. What was one of the running experiences that you had that sort of changed your life, if you will?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is my first trail marathon. I ran this marathon in Stowe in Vermont, and it was the first trail race that I did. So it was I was nervous about that. I also felt like I didn't train enough. I didn't know what to expect, all the things that we think about in our first trail race or big trail run. And it was a double of the same loop, and there was a half marathon the same day. So there was an opportunity when you came back to like the aid tent to drop out. And so thankfully I didn't do that, but I was sort of in the back of the pack, if you can imagine that. And there was a couple people that I kept kind of like leapfrogging with. Right. And I kept coming across this woman every time I felt this like deep darkness creep in, where I'm saying to myself, why the hell did I do this? I am not fit enough. Why did I think this was a good idea? All those thoughts that we have when we're in the pain cave of trying to finish something out and doing it to the best of our ability at the time. So there was a couple moments where I saw this woman and she was kind of in the back of the pack as well. And every time she just kind of leapfrogged and said something like, you got this, or, you're going to make it, you're doing great, something like that, very uplifting. And I got to sort of the last 3 miles that were pretty grueling and brutal, and we started to sort of form this pack with the rest of the people that were at the end of their race. And I didn't see her anywhere, but there was just 4 or 5 different women that we all came together at the end of this race, and we decided at that point that we would all run it the end together. And it was so uplifting. We were all talking to each other and saying like, good job. Like, you got this. Come on. There's only a little bit more, all this like uplifting chat back and forth. And I came from road racing. You put your headphones in, you do not talk to people when you're on a road race. Mm-hmm. So you're focused, your head's down. But this was like this communal aspect. And we all finished at the same time together. And it was a really beautiful moment. And I look around and I don't see this woman. It wasn't a big race, so I thought I would see her. And to this day, I just think that she was literally like a mirage in my mind, that someone who was like telling me to keep going when I needed it the most. And I call her my trail angel. And so that, combined with all these women finishing at the end with us, with all of us together, it felt like this like rush of empowerment. And I literally got done and I said to my partner, I went through the finish line, said hi to my dog and my partner, and I was like, okay, I'm ready for the 50K. Nice. And I was just so stoked afterwards. And I remember that being this just like, I didn't get any like huge epic views. It was a beautiful like fall run in Vermont. I didn't see any like sweeping alpine lakes anywhere. But it was just this community aspect. So when I think of like epic trail adventures, that's what I think of first and foremost. And it was the thing that catapulted me to want to then do more races and just bigger loops in the mountains, and just really make trail running a big part of my life now that I live in Colorado too.
The first few hours after a big race are the most dangerous when it comes to signing up for new races. So
that's what I did. That's what I did. I signed up immediately for a race.
Fantastic. Also very, very dangerous. But you did sort of give the most perfect advertising for what makes trail races so special, right? I think trail running by ourselves, and sometimes it's a very practical thing, it's a safety thing. Races can allow us to go out by ourselves. If we don't have a group of people around us, or it's hard to find a time when we can all connect, it allows us to explore sections that we ourselves wouldn't feel comfortable exploring, because we're not good at navigation or we don't know the area. I mean, I like traveling to areas in the country that I've never been in and do races, and it's nice to show up and say, I'm just going to follow those flags right there. I don't have to worry about trying to figure out where to go, right? And you hope that the race director obviously tries to find the most beautiful route for you, because why else would he have a race in that corner of the world, right? And so there is something super accessible, and especially connecting with other runners, because in our training runs, I mean, as busy grown-ups, it's so hard to find times to all schedule our times together and run, right? And different racing goals, different training patterns, sometimes it is tricky. And so for races, you get the ability to sort of connect with your tribe, with your community, and I think that's what makes racing really special.
Yeah, it is honestly pretty incredible, that feeling that I got from that race. And then I've had very similar feelings in the other races I've done since. And it's been awesome. And I think that I'm trying to sort of create that on my own outside of races and for myself, which I think is just an evolution of my own trail running. I think I might go back to races eventually, but either way, they're definitely what catapulted me to want to explore, to want to find big mountain loops to do in Colorado and way beyond Colorado.
Yeah. Well, Colorado is a place to do it, I hear. I've not been in Colorado for trail running, but obviously
awesome.
there are enough people who do it that you won't get bored.
No, I know it. This is the second summer that we were here, and there's this amazing loop that I want to do called the Pawnee Buchanan Loop that's only an hour from us, and it's just so elusive. Both summers I was or 3 summers I guess now, I really want to do that loop. I really want to do that loop, and it just somehow never comes together. So next year I'm going to do that loop, and I'll let you know how it is. It might be worth coming out just for that. It's supposed to be pretty epic. So.
No, I hear you. We all have our list of things that sort of our to-do checklist that we want to check off. That picture that you mentioned, that still photo on our Zoom call here, is me at the Enchantments, which is also a loop that you can do from 2 different trailheads, or you run from one trailhead to the other. And it's one of the most spectacular places here in Washington. It's in the Cascades right by Leavenworth, and it's absolutely breathtaking to do this. A lot of people try to get backcountry permits to do multi-day camping up there. It's a wilderness area, so they're trying to limit it. But you can, if you are reasonably fit, you can do it in one push. Obviously, you're not spending as much time in the high alpine, right? You have to sort of run through, but it's incredible, and it's something you can do without a permit. That's the other good thing when running.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
I think about that a lot too.
Hope to get the lottery.
I don't have to get a permit. Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Yeah. How long is the loop that is in your picture?
I think it's 18 miles. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's 6,000 feet of vert. There's
a
super there's a so you first go from trailhead to that lake, what that picture shows, Kolchak Lake, and right behind it to the left is Asgard Pass, which is a super steep section that can be really, really sketchy, especially early in the summer, because if there's snow left on the sections, then people can get themselves into trouble. And then when you're up on the top, you have this high alpine plateau that's absolutely beautiful, and from there you sort of make your way back down. So it's one of the most popular running routes in probably all of Washington State, and it was also one of those things where I knew that I wanted to do it, and it's about a 4-hour drive from where I live, 3-4-hour drive. So I always try to figure out how to do it logistically. And when I did a couple of years ago, I finally listened to my friend who said, why don't you just drive and one late evening, go to this little town, sleep somewhere in your car, and then do it the next morning and then drive back. That way you don't need to worry about hotel and camping and stuff. And so eventually I did it in one of those crazy mad pushes, and it was absolutely brilliant. But that was the only way I was able to do it without like some complicated logistics.
Yeah. Those are the most rewarding times, aren't they? When you're like, I'm just going to sleep in my car and get up wicked early and just scoot out the door and just have my headlamp on and crush it. That's the best.
No, absolutely. I don't do that very, very often. I've got kids, and so I'm somebody who's very comfortable and like I like being home by dinner type deal, right? I'm not a big sleep somewhere on the side of the road or in the backcountry. But when you do get to do crazy adventures like that, they are very rewarding. The weird thing with your sort of quote-unquote bucket list, once you check them off, very rarely do you say, well, that's done, I never have to go there again. Most of the time you're like, this was so brilliant, when can I go again? So that list is sort of never ending, right?
Yeah, it really is. Like, how many times can I hit it too? And just like we talked about before, like, can I get incrementally like better at it, and whatever that means for you. So I think that's a really cool part. There's a loop there's so many loops in this area, but there's a loop that's like a 45-minute drive from our house, and it's called the High Lonesome Loop. It's in Nederland, Colorado, and it is like 16 miles car to car, and just absolutely incredible. Like there's a high plateau on the backside of this huge ridge, and it is just unbelievable. And like the moment I did it, I was like, oh, when can I go back and do that?
Right?
It's so good. So good. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Why don't we switch a little bit our gears now and talk about my favorite subject. Thanks, listeners. This is going to be all about podcasting now. So
we tricked them.
I know we tricked. Well, I feel like we made it worthwhile for the first section. So one of the things that you do professionally is podcast consulting, and I'm very curious. Give me a little bit of a snapshot of your journey into podcasting. What excites you about podcasting? And, then we go from there.
Yeah, love it. Well, so I started podcasting in the beginning of 2018. I started a show with my friend Jonathan Ronzio called The Stokecast. And I had been writing for him on his blog for a couple months at that point. And we started going to Outdoor Retailer, the big trade show, for those who don't know. That's usually in Denver, and it has all the big outdoor brands there, and they're usually like meeting with retail buyers and trying to sell their products and stuff like that. So we had been going to those shows and starting to meet with brands and things like that. And we just got to talking one night after that show, and we're thinking like, what's the next iteration for content that we want to get out there. And I had started to listen to some podcasts, mostly NPR podcasts, because there wasn't a ton of podcasts at that point. And we decided we wanted to start the Stokecast, and it's long form interviews that we talk to outdoor athletes, entrepreneurs, adventurers, artists, advocates, all kinds of folks. And it was incredibly rewarding. And we did 102 episodes together. Jonathan is still doing it on his own. But sort of in the last 6 months of the time I spent with the Stokecast, I had gotten sober, and I was looking for a place in which there was consistent stories being told about sobriety or recovery or addiction within the outdoor community. And I just wasn't finding that. So I sort of put my feelers out there to folks that I knew in the space and were like, would this be helpful to you as someone who's in recovery or sober curious or whatever? And because I didn't want to start a podcast that didn't need to be started, we know that there's tons of them out there. So I was like, I want to make sure this is worthwhile if I have an audience. And I decided to start the Nature Untold podcast, which is telling those stories of varied experiences with sobriety and sober curiosity and recovery of all kinds in the outdoor community at large. So that can be someone who likes to go and summit Everest and someone who likes to walk their dog along the creek path, in their neighborhood. So it really runs the gamut of folks. So anyways, all to say, I started two on my own. And then earlier this year, I decided to go fully into freelancing. And I'm just so excited about podcasting in the space. I work for a podcast startup on the side as well. And I was like, I want to basically support other podcasters who are trying to grow or trying to create more community around their shows or whatever their goals are. And so I started freelance podcast consulting from there. And it's been an awesome few months of doing that full time. And I just am excited about what's to come with it.
That was amazing. And I need to pick pieces apart and connect. No,
I went a little far there.
No, it was great. I think it gave a really great overview of who you are in this space and why you love what you're doing. First, speaking of Stokecast, did you feel that interviewing people on a regular basis that you don't know was a challenge? And the reason why I'm asking is because I've been, similar story. You listen to some podcasts, you fall in love with the format, you start one eventually yourself. I've come from technology podcasting, and one of my favorite podcasts called The Talk Show. And there a person doesn't really interview someone, but he has a regular cast of people that he invites, and they're all in the journalism field, and so they're talking about sort of the news and technology, but because they are coming regularly on this show over and over again, they sort of create a relationship and rapport. And what I found with a lot of interview podcasts is that very often, increasingly with technology, it's easy to get anybody to come on the show. But it's very hard to build a good connection beyond, I've read the bio on your Instagram and I've looked at your 2 YouTube videos, and so let's talk about this, right?
Yeah.
I've always found this a big challenge, both in talking to people and in listening to people. There have been lots of podcasts that I've not found engaging because of this sort of lack of chemistry, of connection.
Yeah, I think for the Stokecast, quite honestly, I didn't very much think about it. I was just excited that I got to talk to all my big heroes in the outdoor industry, to be honest, at the time. Now looking back, I've definitely implemented some things with doing the Nature Untold podcast that I learned from maybe not doing at the Stokecast. And not to say that we didn't have rapport with folks, because generally, like you and I right now, I mean, we both love trail running and there's a connective point there. So we can at least know that we have that to lean on if this interview goes anywhere bad, you can come back to the trail running, right? It's
for sure. No, absolutely.
Yeah. But I do think that now, with tackling a maybe more challenging subject matter area in sobriety and recovery, what I do is I meet with folks individually beforehand for 30 minutes, and I try to get an understanding of their story. I try to get an understanding of what they're willing to share. And this is totally informal. It's unrecorded, obviously, but it's a video call in which we see each other's faces and we talk to each other that way. So then at the end of that conversation, I tell them the process for what's to come. And I find that garners a lot of rapport in itself, because if someone trusts you as a podcaster, I think that they feel more comfortable opening up once they get on for the actual interview. So I basically let them know, like, okay, from here, we're going to schedule the interview. Let's look at times to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put together a list of questions, an outline essentially, like you did as well. And you can tell me if there's anything on there that you don't want to talk about, or that you want to leave out, or that you want to add, and I'm happy to do it. It's totally up to you. So I give them that opportunity too, and I give that to them in a couple days in advance of the clear questions. And then when we get on the phone for the actual interview, I ask them that again. I say, I know you reviewed the questions. Is there anything else that you make sure we don't talk about, or that you really want to talk about that isn't included in that I should make note of? Mm-hmm. So it's really, I've found about like setting the expectations up front. And when you do that, I find that people feel like they're in good hands, because they trust you as a podcaster to represent them in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's really smart from an editorial point of view to build the right kind of rapport and connection and stuff like that. So that makes perfect sense. I also want to give you huge kudos both in embracing this very challenging subject for you personally, and then making it public, and then making it public in a way that you're not just sharing your story, but you're sharing other people's stories. I think it makes us as humans better people, going back to Instagram, right? If we are not just talking about the happy clappy peace moments where everything's great, but if we are honest and real with us, that we are humans and that we are carrying things with us, I think it makes life more real and more rich. So it's awesome to hear that you're tackling that. And for our listeners, we obviously have links in the show notes to your podcast and to your other endeavors for sure.
Yeah, thank you. And I heard a podcast the other day of, some folks might not have time, right, to do the introduction call or whatever. And I hear that. I used to have a full-time job and do the Stokecast and Nature Untold on the side of that. So I totally hear you on that. And people have kids like you, or they're just too dang busy to do that. There's ways that you can do some of that introductory stuff via email, so it doesn't need to be on the phone. And then the other thing that I listened to this awesome podcast episode with Tim Ferriss the other day. I don't know if you listened to his show, but he is awesome. And he basically did like a 3-hour masterclass on podcasting, which I assume we can also put that in the notes if it's helpful. But he asks every single guest, what would make this interview a home run for you? Like, what would make this interview just... If you were to say, out of the top 3 interviews I've ever done, this is one of them, what would that be? Like, what would that experience be like? And I just loved that question because, I mean, at the end of the day, maybe not on my podcast because it's like stories of recovery, but on most podcasts, people are coming on because they want more people to know who they are. And there's a reason they want more people to know who they are, right? Besides just having a really cool conversation with someone. So like helping to figure out, like, what do you actually want to be represented as? And I think that's a really cool question to ask some of your guests if someone is like starting a podcast journey, to make sure that they feel really good before going into the actual recording.
Oh no, for sure. I think that's terrific. I have a love-hate relationship with Tim Ferriss because I think he's too good. I feel like I don't trust him. I feel like there's something...
How is he so damn good?
Right?
It's so annoying.
I know. I mean, I feel like everything he does so well. So that seems dubious. No, it is.
Yeah, maybe don't listen to that episode then, because I was like, how are you so good at this? This is insane. Might piss you off more than help you.
That is hilarious. So one of the questions I've put on our list is, what gear do you use? You had previously mentioned that technology is not the biggest of your concerns when it comes to the consulting. Speak to this a little bit. If you feel like it's not important because in general podcasts are good enough, or is it just a matter of being intimidated by technology?
Well, there's definitely a little bit of that for sure. But I guess what I come back to, it's not that I don't think the tech is important or the gear is important. It's that I think it's a red flag to me when someone is coming to me and saying, like, I want to start a podcast. What mic should I get? What, software should I use for editing? It's like, yes, those things are important. But what's more important is for you to know what your reason is for starting the show, for you to know who your target audience is, for you to know how much time you have to give to this, what skills you're bringing to the table. There's all these really crucial, intentional questions that you should ask yourself that should come way before you think about what gear you need to get. Because if you don't have that solid foundation of your why, of why you're doing something, who you're serving, then when your gear malfunctions or your show's not growing as fast as you want it to, or a guest canceled on you, or whatever other frustrating stuff happens along the way, if you don't have that like foundational why to come back to, it doesn't matter what gear you have, your content's not going to be good because you're going to be pissed off all the time. So I think about that first, and then I think about the gear. And my opinion about gear is, you can have a podcast you can record on your iPhone if you really want to. I mean, you're not going to sound like the Tim Ferrisses of the world. You're just not. Like, you're not going to sound like the Joe Rogans or any of the like Pushkin or Gimlet, which are big studios that produce like hundreds of podcasts. They have hundreds of people behind them that are telling them how to use gear in order to make it sound good. And then they have editors as well. Mm-hmm. So I just say all that to say, don't put so much pressure on yourself that you take away from the content that you're actually delivering in order to just get the best gear. So that's what I would say first and foremost. And then I can definitely share what I use, but that's what I always come to first, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's a good enough answer to me, because you are absolutely correct. I think that there are a lot of people who want to start something, and it's not just podcasting, and they really just want to buy themselves some toys. They're not really interested. And I mean, realistically, I don't think every podcast needs to be a business.
Right.
And every podcast doesn't have to have that level of seriousness to it. I think I am very concerned in my limited audio skill ability that I do want to deliver a product that is as professional as I possibly can to my listeners. That professional doesn't have to have the right kind of bells and whistles. I'm not big on intro and outro music and stuff, but I don't want to waste my listeners' time. And for me, wasting time is bad audio, right? I mean, if you're not trying to make the audio as good as you possibly can, then you're not giving your listeners the best experience. That's what's on my mind, and that's what I'm fretting over. Having said this, speaking about editing, and that leads me to the next question, which is, how much in interview editing do you usually do?
Yeah, that really depends on the guest. My current podcast is not people who are technically like media trained, so there's a little bit of fixing vocal tics and fixing some overly verbose questions from yours truly that I don't need to have in there. Cutting those. I do cut a lot of like ums or weird pauses or weird like tech glitches that happen sometimes. But overall, it's really just cleaning it up, I would say. It's not necessarily like putting a bunch of EQ on it or different vocal distortion or anything like that. It's really just using the audio that I have right now. That being said, there's podcasters that do a much better job of that than I do. I am primarily focused on like the telling of the story at this point, and if the audio is so atrocious that I can't even listen to it while I'm editing it, then I will not post it.
Sure.
But for the most part, I mean, the people that I talk to, they're in all corners of the earth, and they just sometimes don't have the like mic capabilities that I would like them to have. So I think it's a matter also of like thinking about who are your guests that you're going to have on the show. You know, there's some podcasts that send their guests to like recording booths, so they have recording quality style for their guest part of the audio. You know, those things all cost money. Some people send mics to each of their guests, which is mind-blowing to me, but that happens as well. So I think you're right. The audio needs to be good enough that someone can listen to it, but does it need to be, you know, NPR style good? Probably not. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. I think for me personally, the editing is tough. Because I feel like that's, while not a direct cost expense, it's a huge time suck.
Totally.
You can spend so many hours on editing, and in some respects, my dream scenario for this podcast is always been that it should feel like if you and I would meet in a bar for a beer and have a great conversation, and a friend of ours would come in and would pull up a chair and would join the conversation.
Yeah.
That's the feel. And I feel like that allows me a little bit of flexibility in or a little bit of laxness when it comes to editing, because I allow myself these breaks where people think of the answer. Because if you take the break out, then you potentially alter, and that's why I'm not experienced with editing, but I'd be afraid that I would take the importance of the fact that you just had to slow down and try to figure out that answer, right? I think there is something there where I don't want to manipulate the conversation too much, because I'm afraid it turns into something that it wasn't.
That's such a good point. And, you know, I'm a sucker for a pregnant pause. I love it when podcasters do that, because it forces, especially when it's narrated storytelling, like my friend Kathy Carlo, who does the For the Love of Climbing podcast. It's incredible storytelling. And she utilizes pauses in her storytelling of the episode. It's not a long form interview, so it's definitely like cut and edited so that it's a story told with narration. However, there's still huge pauses after a certain point. And that's intentional, because it makes you think about what that person just said and consider it for yourself before you go on to the next piece. And I think you're right. If you cut these pauses, even if it's in a long form interview, too short, then you're right, being a bit reductive around the thoughtfulness of someone's answer when they had to take a moment or take a beat to give you something that really felt more profound for them.
Yeah. No, I agree. What's the biggest pitfall when producing a podcast? What do you think can be one of the biggest dangers in I don't know, what are the mistakes that people make?
Yeah, definitely what I mentioned before of like going first into like all the logistical things and not thinking about the overall strategy. I think the other thing that is a really big pitfall is doing it primarily for making money. The podcasting space is incredibly large. There's 2 million podcasts, 600,000 created in the last 90 days. So, you know, there's a lot of potential competition for money. That being said, a lot of folks fall off after like 3 or 4 episodes, realizing they can't produce the show that they thought they could based on the time that they have. So I think it's going after the money first and foremost. I think it's putting pressure on yourself to be the level of, you know, all the podcasts that are well established, that are incredibly successful. I think of like the top 10, you know, on Apple or something like that. And then I think the other thing is what I just mentioned, which is people drop off. They get really burnt out. They didn't understand how much time or money it would be to produce a show that is worth putting out into the world. And therefore they can't do it anymore, and they leave it up there, and it's in the elephant graveyard of podcasts. And that is a big pitfall as well. So I often tell folks, clients or just people I'm talking to, is you got to be able to do it on a consistency level that makes sense for you. Of course, it would be great to produce an episode every single week, and a lot of podcasts do that successfully. But if you have a full-time job and 3 children that you're caring for primarily, and you want to start a podcast, once a week may not be doable for you, and that's okay. It's about like creating some sort of consistency that works for you and balancing that with not getting burnt out on the process along the way, either financially or just energy wise. So I kind of rattled off a few there, but I think that a lot of folks just, they see everyone starting a podcast and they don't totally grasp all the things that come with it. And there's a lot that comes with it, and you know that as well. So just trying to think about the bigger picture first and foremost will allow you to hopefully have a very intentional relationship with your podcasting journey, so that you're not part of the elephant graveyard in 3 episodes.
It does remind me of the early days of blogging. The first Blogspot websites, when it was all of a sudden easy to have your own website, where it didn't require somebody to hand code stuff, when there were these software tools that allowed you to sort of write and express and essentially build your own newspaper. I mean, that's what it felt like. And a lot of people started, and a lot of people didn't find their groove and stopped. And you know, it's, for some people it was just a season. I don't think every podcast has to go on forever. I think some podcasts are great to be a season, a series, you know,
sure,
and stuff, right? When it becomes tricky, then is how do you start something that you already know will only be 10 episodes, and how much effort do you put into marketing it?
Yeah, in that sense, I think that, not coming back to the why necessarily, but you really have to like the topic that you're talking about. Like, I think some people get excited about certain topics that they want to talk about, but at the end of the day, you have to like it, no matter if someone is paying you or not. You know, you have to be willing to have those conversations. And so if you're thinking about doing a 10 episode series and just capping it off at that, okay, that's fine if you want to do that. But like, what is the goal to just have a creative side project? If so, awesome. You have this creative side project. You obviously like the concept that you're talking about. Cool. It seems like 10 episodes, you could tell a really compelling story with that amount of episodes, and you could have sort of like a pure conclusion at the end. But you know, with podcasts that you are continuously interviewing people for and having to talk about and having to promote. So it's not only that you're having to interview people about that subject, talk to them, edit, get all the promotional materials ready, then you have to talk about it also on all your social platforms. So if you are not prepared to do all of that out of interest of that particular topic, don't start a podcast because it can get exhausting if you really don't like what you're talking about. I'm sure you've had days where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. But it all comes back to, do I like this topic enough in the grand scheme of things to continue to do this? Is this serving a big enough community for me to continue to do this?
I think, yes. This is the big challenge, and I think that's why I picked trail running as an overarching topic, because it's so generic, and I feel like, well, I'm putting my shoes on every single day, so it's fairly easy to not every single day, but
I was like, wow, you're a very good runner.
Well, I said shoes. I meant some form of shoes.
Slippers.
Exactly. No, but I mean, I think it's one of those subjects that for me comes natural, because I want to be out, and I am not trying to find topics that require a lot of research. I could have a conversation on there are so many variations and variables of that can be touched, like, for example, the podcasting aspect of trail running, which every trail runner at some point faces, or not, I don't know. But a lot of trail runners listen to podcasts. and try to find the right length and the right kind of motivation of what to listen to, because I don't think there's enough music that we like to nonstop listen to music. I think we would get bored, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm very much my general rule of thumb, if it's a shorter run and there's an uphill and then a downhill or whatever, is like I'll listen to a podcast on uphill so that it's like distracting me from the burning in my quads, and then I listen to like very exciting music on the way down, like whatever I'm most interested in at the time, so I can like really have fun going downhill and like flail my arms. So whatever works for you. Yeah, I definitely don't listen to a ton of music while I'm out, either podcasts or audiobooks. There's just so much content out there, and if you're on like a 7-hour adventure out in the woods, it's like, wow, what a perfect time to have like all these revelations from all this amazing content we get to listen to.
For sure. Is it for you when you find new podcasts? Number one, where do you find them? And number two, what excites you? What brings you to hit the subscribe button on a podcast?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I'll answer the first one, the first part of the question first. So I go off of recommendations from other people a lot of time. Like sometimes I'll just see what other people are sharing on Instagram, and I'll click into that and I'll listen to a couple episodes and see if I like it, especially if it's around like climbing or running or being outside or, you know, mental health. Those are like the main categories that I listen to. And then outside of that, I mean, I listen to some of the biggest podcasts. So I listen to Armchair Expert, every single episode he puts out. I love it. I love his demeanor, and I think he's very disarming and very vulnerable and honest. And I think he allows for his guests to be that way. So when I listen to someone's interviewing style, generally I need to feel like they're really invested in the conversation. There's some podcasts that I've listened to that sounds like they are super bored while they're having the conversation, the interviewer, and it really makes for a crappy episode, as you can attest to. So I think first and foremost, do I see that other people are listening to a certain podcast in my little, you know, circle and community of the internet? And then give it a couple goes. You know, a lot of friends and I would have like the love language of just sending, you know, podcasts back and forth to each other all week. Like, oh, I found this one. I found this one. I listen to a lot of podcasts that then have podcasters on, and then I'll listen to their podcasts. So it goes on and on. But all to say, I'm pretty much, if I'm not doing something that requires a lot of attention or focus, I'm listening to a podcast. So I think that's the main way I find them. And then hitting the subscribe. Yeah, I think like disarming is really important. Vulnerability is important. I think the topic obviously needs to be interesting enough for me to listen to. Like I have a friend who listens to like historical, almost like reenactments of like wartime strategy. And that is so uninteresting to me that I just can't even believe that someone listens to that. But that's so cool that people that are so interested in something like that have this like 4-hour diatribe into into like a crazy battle in World War II or something. So it really is all over the place. The content needs to be something I'm actually actively interested in. And so, you know, self-improvement, mental health, and then outdoors and running is main ones.
I find that I picked podcasts in two different categories. One is an area that I'm really, really interested in, and like every episode inspires me. But the problem with that overarching category is that sometimes I need a brain break. And if I have podcasts that are nonstop stimulating and inspiring, then I'm sort of like my brain explodes. Like I need a couple podcasts that are that's I mean, I don't listen to war reenactments, but I get sort of where this goes, that you need sort of something to listen to where your brain can take a little bit of a break, right? And there doesn't have to be, some people listen to comedy podcasts or so, you know, something where it's not challenging, where it's not inspiring, and it can still be sophisticated. It can still be real and good and wholesome, but something that sort of doesn't really affect your life. And so therefore it can give you a little bit of a break, especially when you need something in between really heavy blocks of work or so.
Yeah.
And so I find myself looking for those two different kinds of podcasts. So the ones that are super inspiring and inspirational, and the other ones that are sort of the exact opposite of it.
Totally. I mean, it's like the concept of Netflix and chill, basically. It's like sometimes you just need to sit there and watch really mindless stuff, or just like random YouTube videos or whatever. And sometimes you want to watch, The Undoing, or like a very dramatic series that is like very dark, or the Ozark or whatever, So I totally hear you on that. And when I'm feeling like a little burnt out from listening to so much self-improvement, I'm like, how much can I do this week?
Exactly.
Yeah. I just listen to music if it happens to me, or I'll just sit in silence and read. So it depends on what I'm doing, obviously, but, yeah, I hear you on that. It's definitely like the two categories. It's like, do I want to feel like inspired to get better at this thing, or do I want to just like giggle for a little while?
Yeah. Well, I really hope that this episode especially was an episode that was more on the inspiring side than on the side of mindless giggling for our listeners.
Maybe a combo.
Maybe a good combo. Okay, I'll take that. Emily, tell our listeners where they can reach out and get more of Emily.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram primarily as far as socials go. So that's for my personal, it's E_HOLLZ, E-Halls. Nature Untold Podcast is the Instagram for that show. And yeah, you feel free to email me directly. It's emily@emilyholland.co. I'm happy to chat with folks always. And if there's any other outdoor podcasters on the listener list right now, we do have a Facebook group to share sort of best practices and come together in that way. So if you want to join that and be part of that, feel free to do so.
Absolutely. Links in the show notes to all of this. Emily, this was incredible. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it very, very much. We'll see each other on the Facebook group. And dear listeners, go out and go on a run or something.